all your senses. I mean, your eyes, your ears, your skin is part of that methodology. That's why it is also very poetical.
And I think in this process, anthropologists engage not really as scientists from top down, but really go to the field to learn from people.
The lens or critical lens of anthropology can provide them lots of insight.
It shouldn't be stopped, with just this word project, but anthropology is not dealing with just, some one stage. It should be, very long, it should be seen in the very long run as an important practice.
Because ethnographic research is not only interviews, for example, in-depth interviews and so on. No, it is not about that. You have to experience it, and observe it, how people are dealing with what kind of problems and questions, and so how they are solving their own problems, first of all.
Okay, welcome to today's episode of our podcast, which will be focused on what is anthropology and international development. And I'm your host, Ruslan Rakhimov, and you are my colleagues, wonderful two guests, Aishe and Aikokul. Please, let's talk about what is anthropology and what is international development and why they should be together.
I can start with anthropology and you can continue with international development, maybe. As a journalist, I'm talking right now because before anthropology, I was doing journalism. And from a journalist point of view, anthropology is a sort of discipline, one of the oldest social sciences discipline that studying cultures, human societies. Culture, I describe how human beings, how human communities live. So it is a very dynamic concept. So, and the main subject matter of anthropology. Methodologically, we use ethnography. I'm in love with ethnography, I should say. I don't care how anthropology is going on, but ethnography as a discipline, a self-reflective, self-critical discipline, has a sort of unique way of looking at how human beings live. Because in the case of ethnography, in this methodology, in the framework of this methodology, you have to experience how they live. This is participant observation, we call. And then you write how you experience. So it is not basic kind of translation, but all your senses. I mean, your eyes, your ears, your skin is part of that methodology. That's why it is also very poetical and relevant to study how human societies live, because all those relations are relations with land, society, other people, air, animals, whatever, goes through our senses. And in ethnography, this makes ethnography very special. In ethnography, they are all counted.
Okay. So. And as a core method, so if you mentioned ethnography as an important method of anthropology, what exactly is happening? Can you just give a better idea? For example, anthropologists going on the field, and
okay.
What are they doing?
I wrote a little essay about ethnography when I was very new in the field, I should say. I can draw on that article a little bit. In that article, I was comparing ethnography with sociological methods and journalism. In journalism, you have, think of, a house in fire. If you're a journalist, you will just look at that and you have to write it soon. I mean, you don't have any time to reflect on it. If you are a sociologist, maybe sociologists will not like this definition. You have some elbows, for example, kind of costumes that protects you from the harms of the fire and so on. So you have these kind of methodologies keep you distant from what is happening over there. But in ethnography, you can say this is the most foolish methodology. You have to go into fire. You have to be burned together with whatever burning. And then you have to go out. You have to survive over there. You have to go out. And then you have to heal yourself, because if you write it down right after what was happening, then you will be writing about yourself. But ethnography is not about ethnographer. So what you have to do, you have to wait until your wounds heal, and then you will be writing the traces that experience, that experiment left on you.
Mm-hmm.
So, this is why ethnography takes time, and this is why ethnography is transformative also for the researcher. Then ethnography is transformative for the reader too, because when it comes to writing, then you have to incorporate the senses of your audience too. So that makes ethnographic writing unique. So it is a kind of reciprocal and layered self-reflection goes on. That's why ethnography and anthropology gives deeper insight regarding its subject matter. It means society and human cultures.
Yeah, I heard actually about this, your example, and I liked it very much. I think it's really, telling us about the core of anthropology. So ethnography is the two main methods of anthropology, right?
Yes.
Now, what is international development?
What is international development? I think I wanted to compliment Aishe, and I agree with Aishe that I think anthropology is a living discipline. I think unlike many social sciences, I think it tries to stay open. It, I think, realizes that understanding life and also humans is very complex and challenging. And I think in this process, anthropologists engage not really as scientists from top down, but really go to the field to learn from people. And I think in this process, they change and also change the places they go to, because it's a process, it's a journey. I think it is indeed an interesting journey of learning, and always, I think, bringing people's stories to bigger stories told by politicians, by institutions, by scholars. So in that sense, I really think that anthropology is a really like a living discipline. Yeah, where I think the journey never ends. And ideally, I think anthropologists are always in this student position of being in this journey. And if we take the international development part of anthropology, then I think that international development, I think, has always been a part of anthropology.
Mm-hmm.
Because as Aishe mentioned, anthropology as a discipline appeared to understand other societies which were different. And of course, in the interrelationship between different communities, historically, they have changed a lot. And this international development part has been always there, of different communities cooperating in different ways. But at some point, anthropologists was in different schools of thought in different universities. And they say that for a long time, we have been romanticizing and engaging with so-called traditional local, and now we use the concept of indigenous societies. Like for a long time, they have transformed under colonial relationships. And starting from 1945, after the Second World War, when many countries started to claim for their independence, so particular methodology of anthropology of international development starts with the decolonization of so-called local cultures, which now became like new nation states. So starting from 1940s, anthropologists started to raise a little bit different questions, saying that these old traditional societies have changed a lot. We cannot romanticize and idealize them anymore. They are not homogeneous as we imagined them before. They don't live anymore in rural areas. So we have to invent new methodologies and also critically engage with all these global institutions which are bringing new norms, values,
Methodologies.
Yeah, methodologies, exactly. Stories in order to transform these people's lives. But at the same time, we cannot deny that they are somehow at different level tied to their so-called local cultures, which maybe do not exist or exist in fragments in real life. So I think anthropology started to raise real, very big questions, how to engage with these societies which are going through huge transformations now. So I think, and within this, I think a very big school of thought. I think there are different scholars who are engaging in international development in different ways. There are scholars who actually also work for these institutions and they do institutional ethnography. There are still people who go to rural areas and study the implications of project. There are people who cooperate with the projects and try to do something on the field. So I think it's a very broad field where people find different niche to engage with it.
Okay, and in this context, I would like to ask you, like, how would you characterize the international field, international development as a professional field here in Kyrgyzstan and Central Asia, for example? What does it mean in terms of institutions? Can you just list some of them? And also, have you heard about some kind of examples where anthropologists, they were welcomed at some point and they were participating, in these practices?
I think to this question, I want to answer as a citizen of Kyrgyzstan, let's say on individual level, and also maybe as an anthropologist. Because when, let's say, my generation was growing up, for us, I think we almost had a dream of working for international development organizations because they were bringing solutions, they were bringing at least the language of solutions and hope and changes. And I think a lot of young people of my generation really wanted to work for international development organizations. But when I went to pursue a career in international development, let's say within the discipline of anthropology, I was exposed to a lot of criticism. And of course, for many young people coming from post-Soviet countries, it raised a lot of questions. Many people were saying, hey, we are being exposed to very radical criticisms, but what to do if back home these organizations are our job providers? So how to navigate? And I think it's a very interesting thing that is being faced today in many developing countries, also scholars. But I think the context of Central Asia and many post-Soviet countries are quite unique because I think although so much literature has been written on Latin America, on India, on many colonized countries in the world, I think we have historically a little bit different context. We were part of Soviet Union. And again, depending on historians, depending on politicians, we have a different perspective on what Soviet past was for us. But we also, I think, cannot deny that we had good things and, of course, challenging things within that period. And now I think we have international development organizations also, I think, trying to do something. But at the same time, I think our people didn't engage with international development in a very naive way. I think our people are also learning to negotiate themselves, especially within 30 years. I think a lot of people also learned to question, but not just be passive recipients. So in that sense, I think international development in the context of particularly Kyrgyzstan, I think has its own metamorphosis, I would say. And it is quite unique. And I think, yes, we have enormous amount of projects going on in the country, impacting people's lives in different ways. And I agree with anthropologists who say that Kyrgyz society, just like many traditional societies in the past, have changed a lot. We are not homogeneous anymore. We are very heterogeneous. And I think there are different people who are benefiting in different ways from development projects. For some people, I think it opened up access to good education, to good job opportunities, to, let's say, better lifestyles. For others, I think it created at least some kind of imagination of what, let's say, a different life could be. For some, I think it became something very challenging. For some, I think it became a reason for more inequalities and so on. So I think depending on whom we talk, we might be exposed to different stories of what's development and how it impacts people's lives in Kyrgyzstan.
Okay, that's cool. So can we elaborate more on the experiences and stories when, for example, you mentioned about negotiations, yeah? The people, they try to negotiate.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe some of our viewers, they don't really know some examples. What would it be as a story? Projects coming, international organization is coming, it's some an origin of any country, and then what is happening? Why people they should negotiate with them? Which context they negotiate?
As I don't study Kyrgyzstan, I cannot make the cases from Kyrgyzstan. But when it comes to my experience in Turkey and also those, literature I read regarding this, I should say there are many layers that people challenge or kind of request change, localization regarding the international development projects. One of them is about the language of those development agencies and their projects have, because language, as anthropologists, you already know, language doesn't mean only a mean of communication, but it shapes and reshapes, transforms the world. So if and people try to understand those wordings, for example, what is a poor is different for those institutions than local communities. So they have to challenge regarding the definition of poor, what it consists of, what kind of poverty we talk about, and we have to negotiate about that. Also, what kind of rationality they are exposing or imposing. Rationality for those development agencies most of the time is about the efficiency of the investment and what investment and the impact. But local communities have their own rationalities. Anthropologists know that since Malinowski, let's say. Yeah. So it has to be also negotiated, and it has to be a sort of framework that those agencies have to open themselves. Another thing, the idea of project, for example, because a project for those funders of international development, those agencies, is something starts somewhere. There is a certain budget, and there is a product. Let's say maybe it's an institution. It doesn't matter, and you can measure the impact, but it doesn't work in that way in the field. That's why it has to be also negotiated. So I don't know any good cases, I should say. I should be a little bit critical maybe in that terms. I don't know many good cases. Maybe for a while the funds and the projects can contribute to the quality of the local life and so on. But later on, there is this big problem of sustainability. Because local cultures, human communities change in a very slow pace, but that project culture limits the time and the efforts for that change. So it has to be also negotiated. So there are many things to study regarding those development agencies. And I think being critical is not only for killing them all, but also the critical lens of anthropology can provide them lots of insight, very good insight, deep insight, how they can reform themselves, because those institutions are most of the time talking about how to reform societies to develop themselves and so on, how to sustain their own development and so on, these kind of frameworks they are bringing in. But rarely we are talking about how those institutions, how those international development agencies can sustain themselves. Because unfortunately, the experience that the world had, especially the global South had with these institutions, didn't work very well. Then there is a question, there's a very good anthropological question over there, research question over there. What was wrong and how we can fix, because anthropology can provide that too. So if we can find what was missing, then we can maybe policymakers and those agencies can bring also some solutions, can create some solutions for themselves. That's why I think studying international development agencies with an ethnographic lens makes lots of sense.
Yeah, exactly. Would you like to add something? But before, I really like this example with the project language, or project as a practice, right? Because I also teach, offer this course, project development in the context of international development. And from anthropological perspective, we do discuss with students that, I mean, the change, so-called change, is never an ending process, and it shouldn't be stopped, with just this word project. Which is sometimes is an obsession for, we understand this is a criteria of productivity and so-called KPI and so on and so forth. So they measure everything with the project because they have budget and they have staff working within this project. And but anthropology is not dealing with just some one stage. It should be very long it should be seen in the very long run as an important practice. Yes, Aikokul.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And I think, indeed, within international development, of course, we are dealing with global community, how to manage global community, right? And I think when you're dealing with enormous amount of people, I think it is very challenging to make all these differentiations and be nuanced. And even if I think people want to, the ones who are engaging, I think it's very challenging. But on the other hand, I think all these efforts are being done in the name of people. And if we don't really listen to people and ask them, is it hurting you, or is it harming you, or is it really giving you an advantage? If we don't have a feedback, I think it is more like being in the same cycle and going around and around. And I think this is what is often happens within international development sector. Sometimes I think there is a reproduction of certain stories that do not necessarily accommodate lived realities of people more seriously, almost like a closed cycle. So in that sense, I agree with Aishe that in long run, I think this is not really effective, because I think recipients of all these projects are people, and without talking to people, and people are changing all the time, the fields are changing all the time. I think, as you also mentioned, we need to engage with the field for a long time, not because really we enjoy it so much, but because it's a process of engaging constantly with people's lives. And I think development is also a very tricky concept, which in a way monopolizes the whole idea of what good life should be for the global population. So, and I think even if people engage with it critically, we can see that people also often trap themselves within these concepts, because we are being today introduced to these global languages, and the symbols are working very much. We have internet, we are watching movies, we are watching videos, and so on and so forth. So I think in order to understand what is happening within international development, you don't necessarily have to read heavy textbooks. Sometimes you have implications from so many, I think, sides, especially in the era of digital world. So in that sense, yes, I agree that it is important to engage with it critically. It is important to ask people. And in terms of negotiations, I think since the good side is that since now information became available, I think criticism is being produced not necessarily by, let's say, scientists or of social discipline. People are also being often exposed to different kinds of stories, and often sometimes even to very much negative and radical stories. So I think in order to avoid such, and people I think are losing trust. And anthropologists as mediators between global institutions and local people sometimes are facing with this lack of trust, oftentimes negativity of local people. And I think in a way it's also making the job of anthropologists very challenging, because from one side they want to be translators and mediate this the language, and it's very challenging, right? And also going to the field and facing with these negative attitudes of so-called local people, I think makes this job at the end, I think, really not effective. So in that sense, I think negotiation, I think we have to take very seriously into consideration how people are trying to talk to us, what kind of concerns they're raising. And then I think maybe things would be more effective.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Yes. Recently, I think some 2 years ago, I actually read some announcement that UNDP was hiring. Was it UNDP or some of UN structures that they were hiring experts with understanding of ethnographic methods? And I was so much kind of, curious about this, and also happy that more and more organizations, they really understand why it's important. But again, maybe to our viewers, what do you think could be, the difference between the anthropologists and another social scientists? Because why would they, hire us? Why not, for example, same sociologists? There is no judgment here, but why not just to, conduct a survey? Other scientists, they also do, those in-depth interviews. They could do focus groups, one of the most popular, methods, and so on and so forth. So what would be the difference? Why they should hire us? I understand we repeated this at some point, but in terms of practices and methods.
Survey as a research methodology has many limitations. It worked for a while, especially in market measurements and so on. But now I think that the most problematic thing about surveys is everybody knows how surveys work, and they manipulate. As a Turkish citizen, I can say that, in politics, they never work, because people tend to manipulate surveys. Just a trick, because everybody knows that, and everybody is a kind of tricky and expensive method of making your research. And when it comes to another limitation, when it comes to measure the consequences of something, it is good. You can use it. But if you want to work on how you should, for example, before initiating a project anywhere, if you want to work what kind of patterns you will be dealing with within that community that they are intervening through a development project, for example, you have to know those patterns. And for this, ethnography is the only chance you have. And you have to provide lots of space and time, and also budget for that kind of ethnographic research. Because ethnographic research is not only interviews, for example, in-depth interviews and so on. No, it is not about that. You have to experience it, and observe it, how people are dealing with what kind of problems and questions, and so how they are solving their own problems, first of all. Then if you are offering a project, for example, to solve those problems in a better way, then you have to conform with it. it. That's why it is very important. There are some evil ways to use ethnography too. I know many big companies, especially oil companies, energy companies, are using ethnographers in that way. They are trying to find out how those local communities could be convinced to evacuate their lens, for example. This is what I mean. I completely reject and deny. I mean, this is a really evil way, but it doesn't mean ethnography cannot be used, because it can be used as a sort of bridge between those interveners and local communities, because ethnography has a very strong repertoire of research tools to fill the gaps in between different worldviews, and different languages. That's why I think it is very important. But I want to mention another thing exciting me regarding our department. I mean, making those international development agencies accessible, visible, understandable, and negotiable is very important, because by that way, the local people can have more potentiality to intervene those agencies' work. I mean, then it will not be a kind of top-down approach. And that's why I think what we are doing, not we actually, you are doing, because I'm not teaching any development course over there. You can tell what kind of courses you are providing for our students. But by this way, we are making local people, local new elites, educated people know about how those institutions work, what are the basics of their mentalities, and so on. And by this way, we are having in this part, I mean, from the local point of view, we are educating actually negotiators. Yeah. I mean, that's why I don't think studying ethnography and anthropology, having the knowledge of this discipline and methodology is not necessarily is not necessary only to work for those institutions, but also we can develop those kind of frameworks, project frameworks that we are offering from down to top. Because then we don't have only the knowledge of the locality by this way, but we know also how to proceed a sort of development project, for example, with those agencies. I think that is much more exciting than working with those agencies, because those agencies are, unfortunately, this is another critical point of view, those agencies are very aristocratic. I mean, they are very close circles and so on. That's why studying them is very important, to make them accessible. Then actually it will be part of their sustainability too. Yeah. Because otherwise, if they go in that way, disconnected from the local communities, local languages, and so on, they cannot survive. Because I mean, the world is changing. Of course, they are. I mean, their place in the world is also changing and diminishing. Actually, although they have really huge budgets, but making them accessible for the local communities, and educating some intermediary moderating people in at the universities like ours could be very helpful and contribute a lot, not only to local communities but also, I think, those agencies.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. The whole idea of anthropology, I think, and of our department is to eliminate this gap between all kind of disciplines, fields, discourses, and maybe international development as an industry is quite close, but I think they are becoming more and more open, understanding that there should be some kind of dialogue, and you should be involved in the real practices, in the real world issues, and I think they really understand that bottom-up approach is the most productive one, right? And what are your thoughts? Maybe you would like to you would like to relate.
Yeah, I think I agree totally with what Aishe says, and I think I think before being anthropologists, we're all humans. And I think especially in the context of Central Asia, I think we cannot deny that there is a hierarchy of knowledge, especially when we try to integrate into market economy. And I think the students of AUCA also, I think, have in a way privilege. And we cannot also deny that when we get more degrees, we also sometimes gain this position as scientists that we know. And we go to the field, I think, with this approach that we know. And I think why sometimes ethnography is more important than other social disciplines. I agree with Aishe that I think it really tries to teach us all, at least briefly, about the history of social science and the challenges of different schools of thoughts, implications. And I think it is, at least ideally, we try to teach, I think, our students to be humble with the knowledges that they get exposed to and not to play with people's lives, and really try to learn, to go to the field to learn. And of course, we are all humans and it is often challenging. But I think often also within our discipline, sometimes we use already ready-made approaches to understanding people's lives within already existing some perspectives. And I think it doesn't really allow us sometimes to listen to the person, but then we hear what we want to hear. And in that sense, I think ethnography, as Aishe said, probably is one of the most critical available approaches to deal with people more empathetically. And no matter how banal it sounds today. And I also understand that often probably global institutions don't have time, resources, and patience to deal with that. But then we also see, as Aishe mentioned, that in long run, we see what's happening in many countries in the global south. And probably it is important also to learn certain lessons and to change these methodologies. Again, I'm not saying that anthropologists already know the answer of how to come up with the best methodological approach to the challenges that we are facing in the world, but I think we are open. And we are open, I think, to learn also from people. And I think this fresh breath into methodology should come from people, because it is people who, with whom we are working. It's people for whom all these projects are done. So in that sense, I think people's voices remain vital. And I think it is important to engage with them more genuinely to build this trust relationship, because I think in a modern world in which we live, one of the main problems is that we are losing a trust. In the past, for example, 15 years ago, if I go to the village, people would be very open to open their houses. I could live with them, I could eat with them, I could stay with them. And now after 15 years, I see that even that is becoming very something romantic for me, because life is changing and people, I think, also understand that there is politics behind knowledge production. So in the sense, sometimes they question much higher things, and anthropologists are not, I think, never on this top position. They're always in between. Sometimes locals don't perceive them as locals anymore, and when they are at the top, they're never top. So in that sense, I think it is a very also interesting position of also dealing with these complexities.
Yeah.
So, and therefore, I think ethnography and also the program of anthropology, it could be a very good place for students where they want to understand themselves, they want to understand the complexity of life. We don't produce ready solutions, but I think we try to think towards it and what could be done.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I think it's very important as a approach, right? To study, to understand.
Another thing I want to add, actually, the literature regarding those institutions, international development agencies, and their fault lines and advantages are really growing up and bringing fame to those people studying them, because it is a sort of relatively recent methodological transformation in anthropology and especially ethnography, because there are also sociologists and economists using ethnography as methodology. I want to mention a couple of them. Maybe it could help to understand in what direction actually and how heavy the agenda of this literature is going on. One of them is Tanya Lee. She focused on the World Bank in Indonesia, and she provided a huge work, a huge research regarding how it doesn't work and what is necessary. Then you can complete the sentence. What they should do to make their efforts work regarding the development and so on. She's very critical. She became very famous, by the way. She is very critical because I mean, it is obvious that many projects don't work because of some how to say, habits of those institutions. Another one is David Moss. He made a research about aid organizations based on how they produce knowledge. So it is a very interesting research on the research methodologies of those development agencies. And it was very surprising for everybody because these agencies are heavily based on data-driven languages. It is a sort of language of technocracy. But David Moss make visible how that language is not representing the local reality. So ethnography can fill the gap between that technocratic language and the language of life. Ananya Roy examined poverty, questioning how microfinance systems work. Remember, 10 years ago, all the thesis about microfinance systems were getting Nobel Prizes and so on. But in the field, there are, the banks and institutions made lots of mistakes and even deepened the poverty of people and so on. This is also, Ananya Roy is a really huge name. James Ferguson, he worked on technocratic governance in South Africa. So it was one of the most brilliant works regarding the transformations of the 20th century in Global South. Karen Ho studied Wall Street because I want to mention Karen Ho because it is not only about global south or underdeveloped countries, but also developed countries require that kind of work and that kind of research. Karen Ho studied Wall Street investors, and accidentally, because she was on the field while 2008 economic crisis, financial crisis, globalized later on happened, and she saw what kind of mentality created that crisis. So it is not about development agencies, but about that technocratic mindset. So indirectly related to what is going on regarding development agencies. Why am I saying that? There is potentiality of fame in this field. If you, of course. This is also important.
And you could name at least 2 Central Asian scholars, Aikokul or Ruslan.
Yes, why not? Why not?
We are not that much famous, but
I think you are doing a great job here. Not only teaching, but also the research you are doing here. It is not only about fame, but there is a kind of huge field and empty for now, especially in Central Asia, because when we look at the anthropological landscape of Central Asia, especially studied by Western scholars, very limited topics they have. They are engaging. For example, religiosity, traditions, this hijacking of brides. These kind of topics are very popular among them. But for me, for 1 year, I'm living in Kyrgyzstan. I read lots of books about how Soviet Union is collapsed, what happened, those societies, what was it about, and so on. But even after 1 year, I can say I barely start to understand what is this post-Soviet transition actually about? I mean, all your conception of life is changing. Your conception of labor, money, even marriage. I mean, everything is changing and people are searching for it. And within such a kind of ever transitionary environment, those institutional agencies are trying to apply their frameworks. Of course, there are many accidents. So as researchers, our job is, I think, find out the essence of those accidents and then contribute. We cannot write projects. I cannot write development projects, but we can contribute the development of the frameworks in that way. I mean, and it is enough big stuff, I think.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and talking about our curriculum, yes, by the way, I mean, it'd be interesting for our some potential candidates if they hear about our program, if they want to apply, like what kind of courses we have, what is our methodological approach, and our, I don't know, research and that. Like, for example, I teach 2 courses. I teach project development, project management, in the context of international development, and then applied research in sustainability. So where I put really in the center the practice and, the create some kind of conditions where students, they have to, conduct some field work. They necessarily should go, and investigate some interesting projects on the field side, understanding how it works, when connecting with the local communities, when looking at the, some everyday life issues and so on and so forth. So sometimes students, they don't really want to do this, or it requires some time to explain why it's important in terms of production of knowledge, in terms of understanding the real world issues, problems, and how can we transform this into the, some kind of knowledge and language to international stakeholders and donors. And it works well because after, as you said, they got burned, they have these problems, and we give this platform within the class, and when discuss all together, how can we transform this experience, even negative one, into something valuable? Then that's this is very valuable for them. I'm sure you have same experiences. Can you share that yet? What kind of practices, what kind of courses, what kind of perhaps class methods that you use?
In the framework of our branch, Anthropology of International Development, I teach actually a course on international development. And I think it is relatively new for us. Of course, we have to refer to international scholars who wrote a lot on anthropology of international development. And I have to say that while teaching in our program for 3 years, of course, I can see that students are saying that it's heavily critical. That it is heavily critical. And since we also have students, especially in MA program, that are practitioners in development sector, I think they often come to learn also some applied real skills. And in that sense, I think your course is quite useful. I think one of the reasons for developing that course also was, I think, the program's decision to help them also gain some skills. And in my case, part of the class is very theoretical. As Aishe mentioned, they mainly get exposed to people like Moss, Rothenburg, Ferguson, Escobar, let's say, Gilbert Rist, and so on. And I think often, they find it very critical. And since I think, especially in Central Asia, we were not part of this colonial context of the Western relation with some other parts of the world, I think I can see in the class that some students cannot relate to this history. And for them, it is something very far. And and they want something more contextual. And I think it is the whole idea of the course. I think teaching this also the historical aspect of development is to stress that development has its own history. It has been changing within the context. That international development is not just about global institutions and international development projects per se, that it is much more complex, and throughout the history, I think it caused to different kinds of emotions, to different kinds of life realities, and so on. I think even if we don't live within so-called I think those kind of historical relations, I think we still have implications in different ways. And I assume that our students who study anthropology of international development, they don't necessarily work in the context of, let's say, Central Asia. But I know a lot of alumni from AUCA who work, for example, let's say in Latin America and Costa Rica, for example. There are people who work in Kenya, Tanzania. There are people who work in India. There are people who go to, let's say, Bhutan and so on. And I think in order to, when you expose yourself to different parts of the world, you need to know at least some brief history of how things came into the stage where they came. Mm-hmm. And also, I think when you work for international development organization, I think you also need to understand that it is a place of power relations, that people come from so many different parts of the world. And these power relations, I think, also merged within a particular context. So in that sense, I think Anthropology of International Development class is not just about development projects per se, but I think it is more exposing people to these complex realities and also theories of anthropology of development. And I think also in the framework of this class, we invite a lot of guest speakers who consist of not necessarily just development practitioners, but also community members who also sometimes expose students to critical lens as a beneficiaries. So I also tell often to students that they have to be open to different kinds of perspectives if they want to work in development sector. And also in the framework of our program, students get exposed to doing ethnographic research. At this stage, they're not necessarily, as Aishe mentioned, doing institutional ethnography in international development sector. It is something that we want to work as a program. But this year, for example, students went to Istanbul to do an ethnographic research. And of course, it is a relatively big city. And they've been, learning about dynamics of the city, about, again, local people's lives, learning to build some form of social skills to talk to people, to get out of their comfort zones, to realize that knowledge production is not that easy, that not always people, especially within a city context, want to talk to them. And I think in that sense, I think our program tries to combine, I think, theoretical part with also applied things to the extent that is possible at this stage. So I can say about the course I teach this much. Also, I teach theory class, and I think again it teaches the course that I teach mainly exposes young people, let's say, to all these grand narratives and big schools of thought that was at the foundation of the discipline, and then how it has changed historically. And some theories, I think, also help a lot. Yeah, so.
Okay. That's great. Aishe, would you like to share some practices, maybe not exactly courses, but some kind of...
I'm not teaching any course regarding development or international development, but I have thesis students, and this year I'm also giving the course, writing thesis, it is called. But I sense, I mean, this is my third semester dealing with students in Kyrgyzstan, but I sense whatever they write about, actually, they are writing about different phases of the idea of development, because the whole transformation from Soviet to market economy created lots of changes in every layer of life. So whoever studies whatever in Kyrgyzstan, it is somehow relevant as critique of that development, the idea of development, because we are seeing in what ways that the market mechanism fails to support people's lives, how it doesn't work, for example, in many cases, and so on. In some cases, how it works, for whom, under what conditions. So the theses are always dealing with these kind of questions, actually, because young students, especially our BA students, are trying to understand what is going on in their lives, and they find anthropology relevant to understand what is going on them. So I'm sensing that I'm feeling they like anthropology, anthropology and ethnography, not only as a sort of scientific discipline, but also as a sort of language and way of life to engage with your close environment and have a say over it. I mean, it is not only just to know about that, but have a say, somehow intervene in that. So that's what I'm seeing, and I think being critical about the agenda of development, also the language of development, gives them also that kind of agency. It was what I was trying to say as my response to your previous question. I mean, this critical framework you are providing in our department is giving them a sort of agency to intervene in many layers to the life, to the context that they are living in, and I think it's so much valuable.
Yeah. So much valuable and so much productive, I think, at some point, because we cannot be, outsiders of what is happening in nowadays international processes. What is happening is quite turbulent, as for me, and I think this is the best possibility for us as well, for researchers, to be part of it, right? And to answer our own questions. Okay, thank you so much. I think it was a very productive and wonderful podcast. Thank you. And please, dear students, apply to our program and let's share this wonderful journey together.